Ladies, welcome to another episode of the Revitalized Womanhood podcast. And I am joined today with my guest, Kat Medina. She is the author of, if you're watching on YouTube, this book, The Joys of Jet Lag. And you know that name spoke to me in so many ways on so many levels. But you don't know is the deeper meaning of what this book is basically aligns with everything we're doing here in Revitalized Womanhood and our mission in the private community, the sisterhood. Kat, welcome to Revitalize Womanhood.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first of all, you're a wife and a mama to two boys, right? Two littles. Yep. And this book, where did you get this big aha moment that, yep, I'm writing this book?
I wanted to write a book for years and years and had started and stopped because the inner critic would step up and prevent me from continuing. And a few years ago, I just committed to it. It became more painful not to write than to write. And then I realized that it was actually quite fun. But the concept came because for most of my life, I was two different people. I traveled pretty extensively and lived abroad in Spain, France, Argentina, Ecuador. And I noticed that whenever I was traveling, I was effortlessly my best self. And it was like joy was just a part of me, and this feeling that I was doing exactly what I was meant to be doing. There was no question or doubt. I felt fully alive whenever I was abroad. And then when I returned home, joy would be forced, elusive. It was so hard to tap into that same, feeling that I was being my best self because I try to control the uncontrollable. I get frustrated when things didn't go as planned, like an inevitable work fire popped up and threw off my schedule. I'd let it totally throw off my day. And probably worst of all is I stopped appreciating the simple things that I knew firsthand from so many places that I'd been and in so many parts of the world weren't available, like clean drinking water or a hot shower. So I'd basically go through the motions of working and planning my next trip and waiting for it to happen so that I could be my best self and feel fully alive again. And then one day I realized that as much as I prioritized traveling, I still spent most of my time at home doing this routine of going through the motions. And it just felt like such a waste of time to be spending my days wishing I was somewhere else instead of enjoying where I was. And so I decided a few years ago to make it my mission to bridge the gap between the two versions of me, my best self, travel self, and who I was at home. And I realized that it all came down to mindset because when I was abroad, who I wanted to be was effortless. And so I realized that I just had to bring that mindset, that traveler's mindset home and look into the different qualities and characteristics that it embodied and start to actively choose to use those in daily life. And it was a success. It made it so that I could feel the joy that I craved no matter where I was. And then I decided to write about it in hopes of providing people with simple but impactful strategies that they can use in their life to experience joy on the day to day instead of just when they're on vacation, which if you're in the US, likely you only have a few weeks of it each year. So I wanted to bring it back for people to use no matter where they were.
Right. And it's really interesting to hear you describe it that way because as I've been reading it, I've only had it for a couple days, but as I've been reading it, it does read like a journal to yourself. It reads like I'm experiencing your growth journey of yourself in the pages. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
as you're showing this to other people, this is what I've learned. It does feel like you're walking us through why you learned it, how you learned it, why you feel like it's important to pass it on. So it reads just like almost like your journal prompts. So it's really interesting. We have dealt with this a lot actually because in the last 8 years, we've traveled mostly long term, 68 countries with our little boys. And most of the comments we hear back, most of the feedback is, ugh, I could never do that. How do you even do that? How do you live that way? Very negative, very negative. So when I the very first cracked this, the couple first pages, and you were talking about people going off and having this vacation mindset and being free and at ease and all these things. And I thought, what? Who's she describing? I don't know anybody like that, because everybody that talks to us, it feels like they take this stressful, I have to control everything mindset. They take it on vacation with them. So do you feel like, because you and I have a different lens of the longer term travel, because when you get to travel long term, we know that you get to fully immerse yourself, right? It's not like, yeah, the day that you fly, that is the most stressful travel day.
Mhm.
Absolutely, hands down, that is my least favorite day. But guess what? It happens once every 3 months.
Mhm.
People, when they hear that you travel long term, are like, "Oh, that's so stressful." And it's like, "No, but you're thinking that I'm getting on an airplane every 3 days. No, I'm getting on one every 3 months."
Mhm.
But do you feel like the difference between a short-term trip and a long-term trip has a big effect?
I do. Well, I feel like there's different styles of travel, you know. There's trips and vacations. And I've since the book came out, I've done a handful of speaking events, and I like to make them interactive and have the audience ask questions, or answer questions throughout. And one of the questions I like to ask people is just how they're different in a positive way when they're on vacation. And, you get all different types of people, all different ages, but the most common answer is that they're more spontaneous and more patient. And I think the key is it's outside of those bookends of the travel days, because they just suck ass. They're horrible, and
Yeah.
they're amplified if you're traveling with kids. Um, but for the most part, I think that yes, when you add more time in between, you can tap into that and fully embody it more easily. But when it's a shorter trip, like if you're doing just like a 1 week all inclusive someplace, um, it doesn't provide the same opportunities of getting outside of your comfort zone that would trigger that.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what it goes, you go so into this so well, and the tools that you give to people is perfect, because mindset is 100% of everything in life. It doesn't matter if it's travel, it doesn't matter if it's where you live, it doesn't matter if it's how extravagant you live or not, it doesn't matter if you have kids or not, it's mindset. Mindset is the key to everything. It is the key that unlocks a successful life, right? So if you already do not have this kind of open mindset while you're at home, you're not gonna miraculously have it. Maybe if it's like you said, an all-inclusive 7 days with just your spouse or something, where you have no kids, no worries, you can just drink, lay on the beach, like, right? Like, have no expectations, maybe. But even still, I think that creeps in. So, how did you find what started your journey in saying, "Wait a minute, I have got to get control of how I'm thinking about my life at home," because as you were describing it earlier, it kind of seemed to me like someone waiting for 5 o'clock, right? Like an alcoholic waiting for 5 o'clock. Which, as travelers, we know that wanderlust, it feels like that. Like, we've been home for, I mean, we were in South Africa a couple of months ago for a few weeks, and still, it feels like trying to get that next fix. It does have that similar feeling. So how did you begin the journey to getting control of your mindset at home first?
Well, I think I first started noticing a difference after my first long term trip I took when I was 17 as a part of a study abroad program to France. And I didn't really speak French before I left. It was like a massive culture shock and a huge challenge, but it woke something up in me. And I feel like even at a young age, when I was like a toddler, I was still obsessed with exploring the world and maps and globes. I was never, you know, playing with dolls and imagining my life as a future mother and the man that I would marry. It was all about how am I going to be this like adventurer. And then when I actually pursued that, I realized like firsthand that there is more than one right way and more than one wrong way to live a life. And just simple things such as like world history varies depending on which country you're learning it in. The United States history that I learned in high school in California was much different than what I had learned in high school in France. And it just made me doubt things in a really positive way and question, why we do certain things, why other countries do different things. And it just planted a seed, and it really just kicked off this total passion for seeing the world. And I noticed that on any trip, I just felt so alive. And I spent so much of my life wondering, like, what am I supposed to be doing? What should my job be? Am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? Because I knew for certain this thing is precious and it's short, and I didn't want to waste anything. And so I was kind of obsessed with not wasting. And so when you feel like you're just half living when you're at home, it felt like the ultimate waste. And so that really started the fire to explore and see, like, I already know how to be this person and go through life in the way that I personally admire. Um, and so how can I bring that back home? And just a lot of journaling and reflection and looking, like, since that very first trip at 17, I've kept a travel journal on every single trip that I've gone to. And I write every single day that I'm abroad. Um, it's like a non-negotiable. And so in digging through some old journals, I noticed different patterns, different behaviors that felt easy and effortless when I was abroad that I kind of just didn't even think about at home. And yes, it was an effort to bring those back, and it still is. I think that's why the book maybe comes across a bit more as like my personal arc of how I'm doing this, because I wrote it to remind myself I'm not doing it perfectly. I'm just trying to do it good enough. And I do need those
Right.
reminders because I feel like daily life constantly tests what your values are, and then how you choose to behave and act, that that either carries you further on the way that you want to go or sets you back a little bit, and then you have to relearn it.
What were a couple of those things that you noticed that you were like, I'm not doing this at home. I have got to start doing this at home?
I think one of the big ones is being open-hearted. And when I say that, I mean, it's kind of rooted in being curious, um, mostly in other people. When I was at home, like before I started actively choosing to be open-hearted, it was kind of like I was very rigid in my schedule, trying to stay on time, be getting things done as efficiently as possible, which doesn't leave a lot of room for spontaneous conversation. When you're traveling, I feel like that's just a part of traveling. You talk
Yeah,
to
it's like
people, you
a
get to
lot of it.
culture, and you leave space for things to show up. And at home, I'd be like, I got to go to the grocery store and then get back and do these errands and then get to work and get on this meeting and do this as efficiently as possible so then I can just finally be. And when I started to try to pinpoint what being open-hearted looks like, it just means slowing it down a little bit so that you do create that space, getting curious with the people who are around you. And it could be as simple as when you're waiting in line at Trader Joe's. Like, what I used to do is pull out my phone, check emails, try to kill, like, make that time useful, I guess. Instead of, if I was abroad, I wouldn't do that. I'd be looking around like, wow, look at the label on that bag of chips. How interesting. It's like ketchup flavored chips. Weird. Or, starting up a conversation with someone else in line. And you realize now, especially I think in our culture, where I was living before was a bigger city before we moved to the mountains. That was just culturally acceptable. And it almost felt weird if you didn't have your phone out. Like if you were in the waiting
Yeah.
a doctor's office or even waiting at the airport, everyone is looking on a screen. And, go back 15 years, people were looking around or talking with strangers. Where are you going? Where's your trip headed? Or reading a book or something. And so trying to get back into that was a big one. Talking to strangers, not the creepy
Right.
ones, but it's kind of neat if you take a step back from the busyness of your life and how much you have to get done and recognize what an insane experience it is with all of the different choices we've made paired with what life chooses for us to be standing next to this stranger at the exact same time. And you might really learn something or gain an unexpected connection. And I know a lot of people right now are kind of polarized. And so when we travel, I feel like maybe because we're guests to the country that we're visiting, we're more open and a little bit more, a little less judgmental of how things are done differently.
I
And
hope so. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah, I feel like that makes and breaks a travel experience. But at home, we kind of dig down our heels. So being open hearted is also listening to people as a way to learn instead of just as a way to respond or agree or disagree. And that makes a really big difference.
Well, and I think a lot of it also is just cultural differences. There are insane cultural differences between European lifestyle, American lifestyle, New Zealand, American, Singapore. I mean, it is insane. Nepal. I mean, imagine them coming and trying to exist in Lake Tahoe not even Lake Tahoe. Let's go even bigger city, right? Let's imagine Sacramento or somewhere like that. It would be a complete culture shock. And they would notice that all of us are in this hustle culture. We're in this hustle, like how you were describing it as in line with your blinders on. Like I've got to get to the grocery store. I've got to go to the hair to get my hair done. I've got to pick up the kids. I've got to go and whatever. We've all got this to-do list that we're checking off versus when you go into one of these other countries, they don't live like that. I mean, yes, there are a couple cultures that are similar to ours, but for the most part, it is not. They embrace the ease of everyday life. They
Mhm.
grow their own food. They walk everywhere they go. They go home for lunch. They shut down for whatever part of the day. It's a complete different way of living. And I think once you are able to, like you're talking about, so I have a question in here about losing control, letting go of control, factoring into our successful way of living. And I think that's so important. I'm glad you put it in here because as Americans, we've just been conditioned to try to control everything. And when you're in a different culture, that's not how they live. It's as it comes. So was that something you recognized? I mean, it's pretty early on in your book, is this, I have got to let go of trying to control everything in your everyday life. How did that go for you?
It was challenging because
It's
um
probably still challenging.
years. No, it's not effortless.
Yeah.
But like it was twofold because my upbringing was pretty chaotic. Just a lot of chaos, physical and emotional neglect, and like I've seen a therapist and stuff and diagnosed with complex PTSD because of developmental trauma. And so when you're a kid during these really important foundational years and you're raised in a really unsafe, constantly changing environment, you adopt coping mechanisms that lean heavily on control. So I had to break those deeply, deeply ingrained patterns. And honestly, travel is what helped me to do that. Even though I wanted control in daily life, it was kind of like when I was abroad, I kind of had this um, automatic sense of trust uh, in the universe and whatever that I could like ease up my grip a little bit. I didn't have to white knuckle it. And this is hard to do because I've always been a really goal oriented person. And I am able to, think of the goal, come up with the steps involved, and then just push through and accomplish it. So there's positive results when you have that. But what I started to notice is that it can be pretty exhausting to have to go about achieving things in that way. And on top of that, you miss a lot of other really amazing opportunities. And during travels, I noticed like I would ease up my grip a little bit. I would still usually get to the destination, figurative and literally, that I was aiming for, but it would be such an easier journey to get there with so much more depth. And it's kind of like when I was controlling something, it's like I made my way on a bumpy, potholed dirt road, but like forced my way through it. And it was rough and exhausting and draining, but I got there. And I noticed that when I kind of eased up my grip and still, wasn't didn't just place everything in positive thinking. I still put in a solid effort, but I made room for life to step in, for connections to happen. It was almost like I went from that crazy, bumpy, tough road to being on a freeway. And I got there so much more easily and faster, and a lot of times to a greater destination than I was even aiming for. So it's tough to let go of control because I think I held on to it because I knew it would get me what I wanted generally, where I wanted to go, but also made me feel safe. You have to be
Right.
vulnerable when you release control, and that can be really scary sometimes.
I actually was thinking about it when I was reading about it, and I had just let the kids decorate the tree, which, when you're first married and type A, that's like a no. No, nobody touches the tree or things like that, things like that where you have these OCD tendencies or perfectionism tendencies that it's like, no, 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 no. But as it's a perfect example of no kids, first kid, on to fourth kid. And
Mhm.
I'm sitting there looking at this Christmas tree that just looks disheveled and there's stuff all over the place and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it's done. It was, like, I don't even care. It's done. But when I said, I bet it's an ongoing thing to let go, especially with what you just expressed is your history in this, is it never stops. It's something you have to continue to work on. If that's something you are a person that has to. So I have to get baskets for my kids' rooms, so I just throw things in them. Otherwise, I will fold them. Everything will be folded neat and nice and perfect, and it has to, so I can't have drawers. I have to have just like baskets, and I know that about myself. And that seems like such a silly thing, but it's not. And so when you're talking about white knuckling it and forcing it, it made me almost like I was like intense with reading it. I was like feeling, oh my gosh, let go, let go, let go. But then you went right into, what if in this white knuckling, what if in this trying to force and pull and drag your life along, you are living a life that doesn't serve you. You are misunderstanding what life is really about. You are missing out that life is about being receptive rather than forcing it. And it was so beautiful. I was like, yes, absolutely. How can we help people understand that there is a life that's possibly paralleling the life that we're living if we could just tap into that? It's not a different life. It's just paralleling the one we're living that more aligns with us, right? And how can we help people to maybe tap into that parallel?
I agree completely. And I think it's just, for me, it was little micro baby steps at a time,
Yeah.
recognizing, like, I think a lot of people who do force things and try to control can be sometimes a bit perfectionistic with it too. And since becoming a parent, a really wise woman told me, like, kids don't need perfect parents. In fact, that can be kind of damaging because then they never see what recovering and from a mistake and resilience really looks like. What being a human looks like, because humans
Right.
aren't perfect and we don't do it perfectly. What kids need more than anything is good enough parents. And I feel like when I heard that, I was like, dude, I'm adopting this across the board in all of my life. Like, just
Yeah.
good enough is more than good enough. Good enough is better than perfect. And so when trying to, tap into that parallel life that's a little bit easier, maybe a little bit more effort though, it was kind of conflicting. It's more effort, but it's easier overall, is that you do it good enough. And I don't perfectly let go of control all the time. Like, that's constantly tested with me as a parent of two toddlers. Um, but I try to remind, if I can remember, okay, good enough is my goal here. Um, that's a win in itself, even though if it comes after I try to control. It's like recognizing that even noticing it happening is progress. And these little changes are subtle and slow and gradual, and then all of a sudden, if that makes sense.
I love that you said recognizing that the little changes are happening because I think it's taken me in my own journey of maybe building this community to identify that you have to first identify the problem, right? You have to first say, or you want this change, right? You identify that there is something, whatever it is, you have to identify it. Then, because you can't have that aha moment. You can't see the progress if you haven't identified the problem first. So I use the example of when we very first left in 2017 with one-way tickets to Paris, just like, here we go. And every single trip we came back from, whether it was we'd been gone for 8 months, whether we'd been gone for a year, whether we'd been gone for 2 months, whatever. Every single time it seemed like we got back and thought, "Okay, but next time let's take more time to let's be more present. Let's be more slow it down and aware," which at the time it seemed like we were doing it, but then you'd get to the end of it and have these moments of, yeah, I just wish I would have really slowed down and enjoyed being present a little bit more, right?
Mhm.
So this is since 2017. Well, fast forward to 2020, what is it? 2022, I think. 2020, was it 2023? Last year, 2023. Okay, fast forward 2023. So 6 months into me building this community, I am like on this trajectory of up, right? I've got a business coach. I'm putting out the podcast. I'm doing everything you're supposed to do to start a business like this. I'm doing the newsletters. I'm doing the Instagram posts. I'm doing blah, 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 right? I've got all my to-dos and my checklist. Well, my husband says, okay, well, I've let you do this long enough and I've been a stay-at-home dad. Let's go travel again. So we're leaving the country again. And I'm like, huh, uh, and I kind of had this like clarity of ease, like this idea of I just want ease in my life. And so I actually made the verbal or mental, I don't care what anything else means. I'm going to live in ease. I'm going to be present. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to enjoy all the little moments. Like, I don't know if this is the last time we'll be doing this. I don't, right? I've got my 3 boys now this time. And I'm like, everything else can just wait. My values are this. Everything else, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And so it's interesting because all this time before this traveling, I thought things were happening in that way. I was like, oh, yeah, we're totally enjoying the present moment. Oh, yeah, we're totally living in ease or whatever. But then we'd come back from it and I'd be like, oh, gosh, some regret.
Mhm.
Well, so fast forward a couple months in, and I'm like, had this huge aha moment of, I did it. I did it. I actually did it. This happened. This is happening. This is what I did. So that long story long, the point being that until I actually made the connection between writing it down or mentally saying, I will do this. This
Mhm.
will be something I achieve, to I recognized it, right? There has to be both of those have to happen, or one has to happen so the other can. Is that what I'm trying to say? Right? You have to identify a problem. Otherwise, you can't track it or recognize and celebrate it when you've accomplished it. It's like getting your, my gosh, why is alcohol on the brain? It's like getting your chip, right? Like, because I haven't drank for them. No, just kidding. But it just seems like that. It's like you get your chip. It's recognizing that you've hit this destination and you're celebrating. It's because my friend actually did just get a chip. So, but you have to identify it.
Mhm. Yeah,
There was
I
no
agree.
question in that. Sorry, that was just a long story, but I
Oh,
love,
I
I love,
think one lesson that I've been learning is like I used to not celebrate or acknowledge like the accomplishment until it was like totally checked off and done. And sometimes if things didn't arrive exactly the way that I wanted it to, then it would feel like a half failure. It wouldn't be
right,
totally a success. And I overheard a while ago, like a year ago, a podcast interview, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was an NFL player and he had this realization of the difference of a goal and an objective. And he said that he always had the goal to be drafted within like the first or second round. And he was drafted, but it was like the fifth or something like that.
mm,
So he made it into the NFL, but he felt like he failed because it wasn't
mm,
in that specific way that he wanted. And it was a huge realization for him. And I was like, oh, I've done that similarly with a lot of my goals too. If it's not exactly as I want it or plan for it to go, then it feels like I failed a little bit. And so I've shifted how I look at things. And it's more like focusing on the objective or the general direction or that I want to be in instead of the specific destination. And in part, like the thing that keeps me going on that new mindset is looking back frequently, when as often as I can remember, and just actively trying to sift through all of the stuff to find the little wins. Because oftentimes before you achieve it, the little wins are really hidden. And that's actually the motivation that keeps you going in a healthy way. That
right.
helps to ease up your grip a bit is if you acknowledge those, and the more you see them, the more you notice them.
What's your opinion on when you're traveling and we're out there, like we've talked about, and you're just like open to things and you're curious about things and you are already taking huge steps out of comfort zones. What is your opinion on, maybe, just maybe, let's just go with this concept that because you are challenging yourself, you are stepping out of your comfort zone, you are being open and curious, all of these things, that that's the reason it feels so good when you're traveling.
Mhm.
What are you doing these things? Are you allowing for these things at home? Are you stepping out of your comfort zones? Are you putting yourself in uncomfortable situations to see if you're resilient, to see if you can get through something by yourself and congratulate yourself for a job well done or a goal achieved, right? But when you're traveling, those things naturally happen. So I don't think people make the connection to the this is a why for this and this is a why for that.
Mhm. I think that like when I'm traveling, it is outside of my comfort zone and I am putting myself out there. And we think that those added efforts of doing that will take away our energy, but it actually does the opposite
Right.
because it triggers us to see and experience things with fresh eyes. And that feeling of overcoming and shaking you up out of what you're used to wakes your brain up, because our brains are these efficiency machines. And one of the challenges we have to overcome is, these brains, they're trying to conserve energy and save it so that it notices any dangers in your life. And so when you're doing the usual routine, it kind of is like, okay, we're safe. I know this. I'm going to just kind of not be present and look out for any real dangers. But when we push ourselves on our trips, because it's a new place or a new experience, it's like activated and on and paying attention. And that can be really energizing. And so at home, what I try to do is acknowledge that my brain's just doing its job. And so I'm going to make it work a little bit and
Right.
put myself out there and try to challenge myself. But I think one of the big difficulties, especially for our culture here in the US, is that so many of us are spread so thin, and it's just so exhausting. This race that we're on, the drive for success, sadly, without the goal of fulfillment, it's totally draining. And we don't have the energy to push ourselves outside of our comfort zones because we think that it is, it'll make us less tired if we don't, but it actually does the opposite. You have to choose to put yourself in new situations because it wakes up your brain and then it wakes you up.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect way of thinking about it. I love that analogy of waking up your brain because it is, you're on autopilot. And so you become bored, you become complacent, or even if you are hustling, you're bored and complacent, doesn't mean you're not doing a bazillion things, but you can still be bored with what you're doing. I interviewed, her podcast actually came out today. Came out today. Her name's Kristen Fennell. She's a neonatal nurse practitioner. And we got talking about the differences in culture as far as having babies in a different country, and
Mhm.
the culture. She was in London versus the culture in America, which you would kind of assume that London would be similar to America, but it's not. They have so many differences where America's pretty much one of the only cultures left where you do this thing and then you're sent home to isolate by yourself with
Mhm.
this baby. It's like you're locked in this shame dome of figure it out for yourself, right? Whereas the rest of the world still embraces community and those kinds of things. So I do see so much fault in the American way of life. I mean, obviously there's so much beauty as well, but I do see so much fault in it in those kinds of things. But so I'm sorry that I digress, but you got me thinking about that. It's so similar, so similar. But so for your travels, you have probably, I'm sure, experienced some crazy unexpected events. Share one or two of the most that comes to mind quickest that you've been like, and the moment you were like, "Oh my gosh, how am I gonna get through this? This is the worst. This is horrible." And then now you look back at it and you're like, "That was actually huge for me as a person."
Mhm. Oh, let's see. Um, this kind of one of the big ones, which we already chatted about, so I'm going to share two. The the studying abroad in France was really hard. I,
Right.
I ended
Well,
up getting
especially at 17.
yeah.
That's
It was, but it just woke me up, and I did it as a part of this study abroad program called AFS, and you have to like interview for it 'cause you're like, it's not just an American thing. It's like people from all over the world, and
mm,
you act as like a representative of the place that you come from, and it's pretty in depth, the information they need to find out about you. And at the time, I was living just me and my dad, and they paired me with a host family that was a dad, his 18-year-old boy, I think a 16-year-old daughter, and the mom. And you like get their little bios and the information about the town and everything. And I showed up at the train station with my gifts for each person in the family. And it was just the boy and his dad. And I was like, oh, where's so and so? And they were like, oh, we got divorced like 2 years ago. They don't live with us. And I was like, well, okay. I was like 17-year-old girl living with
With
two
this
men.
18-year-old
Yeah.
got kid and this man. Oh
Yeah.
my
And it's
gosh.
like going into the country, it was really great 'cause they like tried to prep all of the students like, hey, things are going to be different. You need to just tough it out. And I was like, dude, I was raised for this. I used to joke to my
Right.
friends that I was more comfortable outside of my comfort zone. And
Right.
so I went into it. I'm like, this is just different, and it's more and more of these scenarios where I don't there's that meme going around of that dog in an office that's on fire, like a little cartoon. It's not something scary, but the dog is like, this is fine. Everything is fine. And how I went about it. But I started noticing like at night, like I'm a side sleeper, but at night there, I would wake up in the middle of the night with like my arms crossed and my legs crossed. Like if that's not body language of not feeling safe. I don't
Right.
really know what is, but like the the dad had a temper and he also had like this kind of weird sense of humor. And I just chalked it up as like maybe the French people just have
French.
a sense of humor. Like I have a sense of humor too. But like he was obsessed with me carrying around this little notebook so I could write down words that I didn't know, which I already did anyway. Like that's a really helpful tool when you're learning a language. But he was very persistent that I had it all the time. And again, before I left, I applied to study abroad in Australia and I found out a month and a half before I was supposed to leave that there was a hiccup in the available host families. So I got pivoted and accepted into France. And I was studying Spanish in high school. So I didn't and the quality of language at that high school was like I went there seeing Frere Jacques and like
Yeah.
to 10. So I was not well equipped and I was constantly like, what's that mean? What's that mean? What's that mean? And writing it down and I'd forget. Like you need to hear things more than once to remember it. Especially when your brain is on overdrive with all these new experiences. And he would get really mad if I didn't have my notebook. And one time we were cooking dinner in the kitchen and he was talking and I said, oh, qu'est-ce que c'est? Like, what's that? And he's like, I already told you, where's your notebook? And he grabbed the knife he was cutting vegetables with and like held it up to my chest, like an inch away. And then he laughed. And I was like, this is beyond the weird sense of humor thing. And
Right.
um, I toughed it out for about 2.5 months and I didn't want to be difficult. And I just kept trying to tell myself, like, this is just a difference in cultures. But it was just started to get really bad. And I finally spoke up to like the coordinator and I told them some of the stuff, but we decided like, there wasn't really an available host family I could switch to. So they told the one I was currently with that I wanted to move. And I told them it was because I didn't like, I wanted to be around a woman, like it was kind of,
Right.
I asked them, I'm like, why am I paired with just two guys? And they were like, well, you said that you just lived with your dad in California. And I was like, it was my dad. That's
That's
a
my dad. Yeah.
different scenario. But I had to go like 2 or 3 weeks living with them when they knew I didn't want to live with them before I was able to move, which was so awkward. And the dad just kind of like ignored me the whole time I was there because
Yeah.
they kind of saw it as me being ungrateful for
Mhm.
the experience. But to answer your original question, that was, I mean, as a young, as a teenage girl, being put in this scenario after being raised, um, kind of to people please a bit and never put myself first. It was one of the first times where I kind of went against how I was going to be perceived by others and chose what was right for me and what I knew in my bones to be the right thing to do. And even if people were, giving me the silent treatment for 3 weeks, like I knew in my heart, like I'm I'm doing what's right, and that's okay. And so that was a really big eye-opening thing to come out of that with that newfound power, I guess.
That is a power. That is incredible because especially when I am the founder of a community for women that are, I mean, my oldest is 78 years old and she's still learning these kinds of concepts,
Mm.
not to be a people pleaser and to think of how this is going to affect her first and that that's not a selfish thing, that that's an okay thing. It's an okay thing to say, this doesn't work for me. It's fine. So why should something that doesn't work for you work for anybody else? It has to start with working for you. That is how you become authentic and living a genuine, aligned life, is you have to start with thinking about yourself. So as a 17-year-old people pleaser, which is what we all are basically here it is in all multiple cultures, but because we are in America, obviously, that's a big deal. I think especially in high school, we learn to be sweet and pleasing and that's where a lot of body image issues arise and that's where a lot of eating disorders and abusive relationships and toxic codependency. I think all of that starts because of a culture that encourages people pleasing.
Mhm. And I think
So I
okay,
think that's incredible for you to be able to get your power and stand up for yourself in that situation.
one of the things that I noticed too is like that, you know, getting silent treatment and stuff that's can be really isolating and make you feel
Yeah.
lonely. But those months leading up to it, it's hard when you can't communicate with someone or understand beyond like gestures and like just horrible language skills, um, and not knowing a soul. And just at the time they had it, like this was in 2003. And so they wanted the kids to be really immersed in the culture. So they suggested, and I was a rule follower, that you only contact your parents once a month. And
Mm.
I followed that. And um, I think, in looking back, one of my favorite things to do sometimes just in reflection is looking back at all these little moments in your life that connected and happened so that you're exactly prepared to be in the moment you are now. And my upbringing of a lot of times being just alone, I was comfortable with my own company. And so when I was abroad and it was like truly alone, I didn't feel lonely. And because I was kind of like, I got me. I don't need
Mhm.
others to have my back. And now I'm kind of unlearning it and
Yeah.
welcoming in the power of connection with others. So, but at that time, that's exactly what I needed. And now I'm at a different stage in my life where I can see like, yeah, I got me, but it's actually even better for me in this lifetime to have others have my back too. Like that's
Right.
what really just amplifies and it gets me on that fast track freeway instead of the bumpy road.
Because especially how does that affect you as a mother and
Hmm.
your parenting? I bet you look back on that and you think, my boys will know to call me. My boys would know if this is a situation that makes them feel uncomfortable to call me,
Yeah.
right? That's a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So with travel, you've had these life lessons. Did you learn about yourself? What were your aha moments when writing the book?
Um, so what I did to combat that inner critic that stopped me so many times before is I I made rules for myself. I used to like one of my favorite things when traveling is just the simple act of going to a cafe, getting a cappuccino and like a pastry or whatever, and then just sitting there. And I like to journal there, or I just like to just watch the scene,
Mhm.
unfold. I love that. And it's something that I never did at home because I
Yeah.
was like, that you hear certain phrases and they just stick in your mind, whether or not they're true to you. And it's like, if you go out and get a coffee somewhere, then that adds up to such and such amount during a year. And I'm like, well, that could be a trip. And
Right.
when I started writing the book, I'm like, look, here's the deal. I'm going to make this fun. And so the rule was once a week, I go to this cafe and I stay for an hour. I did this before work, 1 day a week. And the rule is uh, no editing, no critiquing. I just write from the heart. And if nothing's coming, if nothing's flowing, then I can't do anything else. I don't get to go through emails or start working or look on my phone or whatever. Just have to sit there like an awkward
Mhm.
person staring at their screen. And first couple times it was tough, getting the habit in place, but I did really enjoy my cappuccino. But then it started to flow. And then it was like, I got to get up earlier because I need more time. And I went through, I think it was like, I wrote it in 9 months, going once a week. And it became this really enjoyable practice of learning how to just trust what was coming through my fingertips as I typed instead of as it was getting out there, editing it in the moment,
Mhm.
like kind of silencing it and being like, not now, it's not until the end. And it started this writing practice outside of the book of like morning pages. Julia Cameron talks about it where I don't do this currently, but I'd love to get back into this habit where in the morning before you start your have tos and everything, you take time to write 3 pages, stream of consciousness, no editing. You just got to keep your pen moving. And most of the time when I did that, it was just donkey shit, like just so bad. No insights, but every once in a while, I would uncover this gem that was buried underneath all of this like rambling thoughts. And it never would have came to surface unless I'd taken that time to dig past all of that stuff without editing.
Right, your chaos. You have to get the chaos out of your head. It becomes the clutter that masks these other important things that need to come out.
Mhm.
I love that. Have you ever read, just to go back, just a quick thing. Did you read Green Lights, Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights?
Yes, I actually listened to it on Audible because I just
I
love.
had to listen to it too because of
Okay.
his voice. Yes.
Yeah.
But I did read it as well. But yeah, your story reminded me of him going to Australia. So
Yes.
I couldn't help but just think, oh boy, I'm glad I didn't go abroad when I was 17. No, I love it. Okay, so let's wrap this up finally. One last question. What is one mantra or practice or insight from the joys of jet lag that you'd encourage every woman to adopt as a way to live more boldly and authentically?
That is a great question. Hmm. Okay, I'm gonna say so my subtitle is how to use a traveler's mindset to not be an a-hole in daily life. And
Mhm.
it's in a sense breaking free from that asshole autopilot mode that we fall into because we're trying to be efficient, get through the have tos so we can do the want tos. Um, and so I'm going to say twofold. One aspect is to let go of this constant need to produce. And just for a small amount of your week or your day, start small, like 10 minutes a week, create space that's free from distraction. Um, I think like I was born in the 80s and I love that I kind of got both worlds growing up without the internet at first and then seeing that transition into my life. I got to see the before and after. And I remember as a kid, I was bored a lot, you know,
Mhm.
and it forced me to use my imagination. And boredom can be really uncomfortable if we're not used to it. And I think the thing is you have to allow space for that discomfort, lean into it, because right on the other side of it is where creativity, curiosity, wonder and imagination live. And that's where you allow that tiny voice inside of you to speak and say what it's calling you to do. And I think that it's our job during our lives to listen to it and act on it, but you need to create space for it. So to make this tangible, um, start like today, tomorrow, even if the weather is super crappy, go on a walk. Don't bring headphones. Don't listen to your amazing podcast just for this one time. Um, and go on a walk where you just head outside and two things: create space for that distraction. You're going to realize you have a whole bunch of thoughts. A lot of them are really weird. Um, and if you need some guidance on what to look for, head outside and try to find something that makes you feel awe. Um, I think that's one of my favorite things about traveling is I put myself in situations where I can experience awe. You know, you travel to beautiful destinations or amazing structures that have been built, thousands of years before. So you go to these awe-inspiring places. But one of the best things you can do to bring that traveler's mindset and the same feelings that come with it to daily life is to actively seek out moments of awe. So how do you do this? You go on your distraction-free walk and you just observe. I cheat a little bit because I live in a really beautiful spot. I'm lucky. I live in South Lake Tahoe. I'm like a 2-minute walk from the woods. So it's easy to find awe when you're looking at a pine tree, you know? Um, but if you live in the city, like, can you see a plant that's survived somehow squeezing its way through the cracks of concrete? Or just a human interaction of someone being kind. Um, the more you seek them out, the more you notice them, the more you start to appreciate them. And I recently started this challenge during December. I wanted to retrain my brain to notice these things, to notice joy and delight more frequently. Because I noticed myself going back into that autopilot and just seeing things that I needed to fix.
Right.
So I got some friends on board for accountability, and I was just like, simple, just once a day, I'm going to shoot you a text of something that made me feel a little bit of joy or delight. You can do the same back to me. Um, and after about a week, I noticed that there was a huge difference in the things that I started to notice. In the beginning, it was kind of like bigger things, like, oh, my son took like 10 steps with a big smile on his face. It was like a really big moment. And then, like, yesterday, like 2 days ago, I was driving and I noticed like it was like super icy roads and there was a bit of wind, and the wind was blowing this like little bit of snow that was on the icy road up, and it was swirling around in these crazy patterns. I never would have noticed that unless I started
Right.
this like delight challenge. But I noticed that the more I'm into it, the more I've made this habit of just once a day, I'm seeing them everywhere. And it's not just big things, it's little tiny things. But the only way I'm able to see it is with that intention and by creating that space to actually look, because it's hard when you're multitasking. And so just take time, 10 minutes today. If you want to be an overachiever, do it every day for a week and just see what happens. It can be really short and brief and simple. And just, if we have time, I just want to share one more thing that,
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
okay. Um, I feel like for a long time, I've had this goal or objective that, on the scale of, I want to enjoy each moment in between travels. Okay. That's the whole point of this book. And more recently, I've been looking at it in a different scale or a different sense. And I noticed that I, as much as I try to have this mindset, I'm kind of rushing through my mundane have tos so that I can get to the good stuff so I can enjoy the present moment while I'm here. An example, rushing through meal prep so that I can sit on the floor and play with my boys. Okay. Like, valiant intentions. I'm trying to be present, use traveler mindset with my boys, but I wasn't doing it with my have tos. And here's the thing, the majority of my day, and I think the majority of most people's days, are the mundane have tos with
Mhm.
bits of sprinkling of the good stuff that we want to do. And oftentimes we plow through our day trying to be as efficient as possible so that we can get to the good stuff. And we're drained by the time that happens. And because we're pushing so hard to get past it. And so I've had the intention of enjoying these have tos or just being present in them instead of rushing past them. And it's forced. But since I started like trying to seek out these daily awes, these daily joys, um, there have been two moments where, like an example, I my kid had the stomach flu, awful. He threw up all over my phone and my Kindle and the duvet cover, and I had just washed the sheets. So I threw the duvet cover in the laundry. And that's one task I hate, is putting the duvet
Oh, I
cover
hate the
on,
duvet.
tie the
Ugh.
buttons and put the buttons on. I hate
Right.
that
I
task. So
refuse.
I just let it sit on the bed for a few days. I'm like, I can't. And then like a couple days ago, I was finally like, it's time. It's time to put the duvet cover on. The boys were playing. It was very cute. And normally I'd rush through that so I could enjoy what they were doing. And instead, without even trying is the cool thing. I think maybe because I had that subconscious mindset to seek out these moments, I like felt the fabric in my fingertips as I pushed the buttons through, and it was soft. And then I noticed like the way the room smelled, and kind of activated all of my senses without even
Mhm.
trying, and slowed down and was uh, present without the effort. And I was like, this is it. This is this is my new objective, is to try to tap in into and acknowledge as many of these moments as I can without trying to force it.
Yeah, 100%. We have actually a tool here in the Revitalized Sisterhood community that I created called the Happiness Tracker. And it's all about creating mindfulness and intentionality in your day, in your everyday life. Because my motto is the moments may be big or small, but they're all an adventure. If you see the adventure, if you look at anything in life, it's an adventure. You know, it comes from fear. Doesn't have to be a negative word. It's if you look at fear as something exciting, adventurous, new, you know, rather than scary, whatever. So this happiness tracker is basically, I require my members to write down for a week every single thing that happens in the day. I mean, everything. Like, wake up at 6, get out of bed, brush my teeth, right? And as they're doing it throughout the week, trying to find the joy in the things that they're already doing.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna already I get up an hour before my family. It brings me so much joy. That is something that is just like a me time. I get to scroll, I get to watch Netflix. I make my coffee a very specific way. I researched a coffee maker for 2 years before I finally bought this thing, right? It brings me a lot of joy. I would be making my coffee anyway.
Mhm.
It brings me joy. So the point being, like, I'm going to go to the gym. It's part of my routine. I drop my kids off at school. I go to the gym. Well, what do I like to do? I like to put on a really cute gym outfit. Like, I love my workout clothes. They're comfortable. They're cute. Like, I love that. It's something I'm doing anyway.
Mhm.
But I'm doing it, if you're doing it just as a checking it off the list, it's mundane. It's the hamster wheel. But
Mhm.
if you can really stop and focus in on what about that one mundane thing, putting on clothes, is bringing you joy, can bring you joy, and then you start recognizing those things, all of a sudden your life is filled with all of these joyful moments.
Mhm.
And in return, the same respect for negative things. If there are things in your life, that's one of my coaching things, is it's like, go through your day, and if there's things that you're like, the duvet, ugh, no. Like, get rid of the damn duvet. Like, right? So
Mhm.
for me, it was a rug in my living room. Every day I look at this rug and I think, I hate you. You are disgusting. I can't even imagine what's living inside you.
Oh.
We've had this rug for 18 years of our marriage, right? And it's just horrifying and you can't wash it. And I'm like, what lives in there? And finally, 2 months ago, I got rid of the stupid rug and got a new rug off Amazon, and it brought me so much joy. It brings me joy every time I see it now.
Mm.
It's like I just amplified. I didn't just take away something that makes me mad every day. I added to my joy.
Mhm.
So it's like, just be intentional. It's like you're saying, be mindful, be intentional, slow down to the point where you are identifying the things in your life that bother you, or you're identifying the things in your life that make you happy. Do less of those and do more of these,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
It seems so simple, but like you said, you have to carve out that time.
Mhm.
Because if you don't, we all have the same amount of time. I cannot tell you, I I loathe when people say I don't have the time. It
Mhm.
makes me think, oh, well, I do have the time to do that. So is my time not as important as your time?
Mhm.
Am I not spending it as much? Like, oh, I've got all of these kids' activities and schedules and does this. Oh, am I not as good of a mother as you?
Mhm.
Because I have time to do those things, but you're saying you don't because you're a mother?
Mhm.
It just, we all have the same amount of time. It's how you're prioritizing that time. Yeah, maybe that's more important to you to go to your kids' football and basketball and whatever, have them scheduled out so far that they can't even see straight. Good. That's your priority. Mine is not that, but don't tell me you don't have enough time.
Mhm.
So 100%, I'm with you. I will amplify that in which you're saying, cut out that time,
Yeah.
make it important.
Mhm.
But thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to share your book with all of my listeners. And if you need any other help getting the word out, I'm happy to share it on my socials and my platforms. But congratulations. This is
Thank
amazing.
thank you so much. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is a great
So
conversation.
go and find The Joys of Jet Lag by Kat Medina. And thanks for being here, Kat. Appreciate it.
Thank you.